Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Good season for us. Really, really proud of the work that the guys and the staff accomplished. Um, it was a good playoff run for us. I think we left the Spurs the Spurs series both encouraged and disappointed. We encouraged by steps we've taken, where we're headed, but disappointed. We thought we could have played better, and we understand it's a process. It was good to get those reps in against a really good team, and a lot of good exit meetings today with the guys, and a lot of positivity and excitement around where we're headed. So that was step one. Now our challenge is to, keep getting better, and we can get into some of that. And just walking out of here really optimistic about, a big step that this team has taken.
On that note, what are the biggest needs this offseason? What do you think this team is missing?
Yeah. From a skill set perspective, I think, the Spurs series showed us that, and really the whole season, that we just don't shoot the ball well enough. So, shooting is something we knew we were somewhat deficient in, and something that we tried to address a little bit at the trade deadline with Krejci. Something that Dame will definitely help with, but it's still a need moving forward. We played a lot of possessions in the mud where, it was a crowded paint for our attackers, specifically Denny, Drew, Scoot. Like, they just didn't have a lot of room to operate. And, teams guarded us a certain way, knowing that we were really good at the rim and not great on the perimeter. And, I think offensively that just created issues for us throughout the season, highlighted by high turnover rate and low shooting percentages. So that's one thing. I think, we also just, still need to keep improving our talent base. A lot of that will come internally. I mentioned Dame already. Of course, that's a big talent boost. But individually, our guys got to keep getting better. We have a lot of young guys who have a lot of growth in them still, so they got to take another step. But also, we need to look externally for additions that can continue to, boost our talent. This league, this Western Conference, it's tough. We've got to, keep getting better and keep, stacking these players to be able to compete with these guys.
On that note, like ownership-wise, what's Tom's directive or edict heading into the offseason? What does he want to see?
Yeah, growth. He wants to see, us continue to get better, on and off the court. Tom and I spend a lot of time. He spent all season, he's so competitive and so diligent and so engaged with this team already. He studied us deeply and intensely, watches every game. We talk pretty much after every game. So he got a really good feel for us, even before he took over. He was watching all the time. And I think was really encouraged with what he saw. He saw continued growth. He saw a talent base that is very promising, understands the assets that we have moving forward with all these picks that we have. He challenges us every day to, go gain an advantage, go, find the right player at the right price point to can keep improving our roster, but also, internally improving our processes and, how we're looking at things, whether it's from a coaching standpoint and our style of play and, our player development techniques, whether it's to health and performance or scouting, it's just overall just getting better and better and fine tuning, all these areas that are needed in order for a team like ours to thrive.
Joe, the last couple of years you talked about going into the season as an evaluation year, and that this year it would still be an evaluation year with more of the hopes of winning and all that. How do you evaluate this year, considering all of the injuries? The rotations were different. Guys were in and out and asked to do different things. So how do you evaluate that?
I thought at times it almost made it easier to evaluate because we saw a lot of our guys be put in positions that challenge them and, that they may have not have been in otherwise. I think Denny's probably the premier example where, the season prior we put the ball in his hands quite a bit and saw him thrive. This year we put that in hyper mode and he literally had to carry our offense for, 6+ weeks where he was the point guard, he was the playmaker, he was the initiator. So we were able to test those limits of his capabilities and saw that he was able to live up to those. Bunch of other different examples where we just were able to see all these different subsets come to fruition, whether it's City Sissoko getting 1,000 minutes or Caleb Love getting 1,000 minutes or Shaden Sharp bumping up his usage, up to the 30% range, to Scoot Henderson starting and getting some great playoff reps, to Donovan Clingan being dominant for some stretches because of his ability to play big minutes, play through some mistakes, just continue to grow. We saw a lot of individual wins this season. I'm happy with how the team did, but individually, I thought there were a lot of great things. I mean, Rob Williams coming back healthy and looking like the Rob of old. Matisse Thybulle coming back from injury and being really impactful. Jeremy Grant coming off what I think he would say, a rough season the year prior, being, a 120 PSA guy again and banging down threes and getting to the rim more often. Tamani Kamara playing in every single game this year, premier defense, showing some flashes of being a premier shooter. So, a lot of individual wins that sometimes you wouldn't see. Like if you just had a fixed 9-man rotation, maybe you don't see the Chris Murray impact, some important April games. Like there were just so many of those that those guys having that opportunity were able to, jump at.
Joe, what's the current status of the head coaching position, and do you have any sense of when there's going to be some sort of decision on that?
The current status is Tiago is a candidate for the position, but we're also looking around at other candidates. We've decided early on we were going to cast a wide net and, get to know a lot of different coaches and analyze and evaluate them in relation to Tiago. And timeline-wise, we don't have a timeline pinned down. We just want to keep meeting people and keep talking to people and having a really thorough process.
Joe, do you have a coaching opening?
Do we have a coaching opening?
Is Chauncey Billups still your head coach?
So the Chauncey part of it, there's no new updates there. There's nothing really I can add to that situation. But as far as Tiago being interim head coach, he's a candidate along with the other people we're talking to.
But is there... It sounds like there's no scenario where Chauncey would return to the Trailblazers, but he's still officially your head coach. So how do you dissolve this?
I just can't comment on at this point. We'll update you when we can.
Just from a personal perspective, as somebody who has known Chauncey for quite some time, what was that day like for you? This is our first time getting to talk to you one-on-one.
Yeah.
So what was that day like for you waking up to that firestorm just personally?
When the time comes and I'm able to talk about it, I'm happy to share. But at this point, there's nothing I can add to it at this point.
Joe, what has the league asked of you guys in the wake of his arrest, and as they've done their investigation? What has the league been asking of the organization?
The initial ask was name a replacement, which we did, and the second ask was no comments until there's an appropriate time.
Joe, you mentioned Tom's understanding of the roster, the assets you guys have. Is there any urgency or change in direction with what might turn out to be a different value scale for the draft picks as far as like what the NBA as the league as a whole is looking at with anti-tanking provisions?
Sure.
Studying that really closely, been involved in almost all of those discussions as far as league's been really good and really thorough about putting a lot of attention towards this topic. And, we're just trying to stay ahead of it and learn, the cause and effects of what these changes could be. I think at this stage, it's a little reckless to speculate on it because there's so many parts of it that just may or may not happen and what layers will be implemented and what won't. So, obviously, with all the assets that we have moving forward, it's an important decision for us. But right now, just trying to just kind of walk through the different scenarios and the pros and cons of how changes could affect those.
Is there a current scenario in there that you prefer?
Generally speaking, selfishly, yeah, of course, there's some that could be better for the Trailblazers than others. Overall, though, I think Tom and I are both really firm on whatever's best for the league on this one. This is an important topic that we think everybody agrees needs to be addressed. So if it's best for the game, we're going to be supportive.
Do you feel like you need to add like the big splash that Tom talked about at his or do you feel like you can work around the margins with the base you have? Like, how do you approach that this summer?
We're open-minded to both. Big splash is definitely something that's intriguing to us, but only at the right price point. We're not going to completely sacrifice our future for a short-term swing. But at the same time, we plan to be very active and aggressive and explore all opportunities out there. If none of those opportunities present themselves, we'll be content doing some smaller things, knowing that or confident that our talent base is strong and that, the addition of Dame, the internal development, fine-tuning some of these skill set deficiencies we have, we can take a nice step whether we make a big splash or not.
Back to the coaching search. Do you feel like you have the budget to go hire the best coach available?
I do. Yeah. A lot of the reports on budget out there were a little misleading. Have talked to Tom a lot about this. We're going to pay the coach based on some sort of level of shared risk. If it's a first-time coach who comes with a lot of risk and doesn't have a market that we have to necessarily compete in, it'll be one number. If the coach we're talking to is a 15-year vet and a future Hall of Famer, it's going to be a completely different number. And Tom isn't going to flinch at either of those scenarios. We're going to be very open-minded to what types of people we interview and would potentially bring in, and I'm not concerned about the number at all.
Joe, how have you found Tom's adaptability over the last month as he kind of gets used to how the NBA works compared to the NHL?
Yeah. Well, I think in any new scenario like this one where a new group takes over, there's some things that you're learning on the fly. You just come in and you may not have a full understanding of how everything moves in this league, and it's a job that I have that I probably need to do better at is just, advising and educating and helping navigate these decisions a little more carefully. But I would say overall, like the adaptability, I think like Tom's super sharp, super attentive, very communicative, and I think we've gotten on the same page very quickly since he's taken over about just how the league moves in general, but also how we as a Trailblazers organization want to move together.
Has he given you any assurances about your job, or has that come up at all in your guys' conversations?
We haven't talked much, and I haven't asked. As you get to know him, and some of you do know him already, he's so transparent that if I thought I was at risk right now, I probably would know it. But with that, no long-term promises or anything have been given to me, and I understand that's part of the job. Like, really, none of the other 30 GMs around the league have much certainty either. We're all day-to-day in this league, and I'm just moving forward understanding that my challenge is to do an incredible job like I've always tried to do, and, those chips will fall how they fall.
Joe, I think a lot of fans' hopes for this team are pinned on kind of Scoot and Shade and those guys kind of being the young players. How do you look back on their seasons, particularly with kind of the injury issues that both those guys had this year?
Yeah. We'll start with Scoot. That was a big hit for us, when he tore his hamstring, and him, he had a great offseason for us. So him missing those first 50-plus games, that was a big setback. But really encouraged by the way those remaining 3 months worth of basketball went for him. Good and bad, I thought he came out of the gate looking great, and then he hit a little rough patch, when we went on that road trip. And for me, that's all positive stuff. That's development, especially his ability to come out of that and then to get into this playoff series and play against, a premier defense under the big time lights and really show like his high end potential and his ability to, not just score the ball, but I thought defensively he had some really nice moments for us in those playoffs. So Scoot's resiliency through a very complicated year for him, I thought was really encouraging and something I'm proud of. Shaden's was unfortunately the inverse, where, he was able to play early, and I thought he did a really good job, like helping carry us through those, those injury-filled months where, we didn't have a lot of playmaking or ball handling, and really it was him and Denny carrying a massive load. And for Shaden's efficiency to stay pretty flat while bumping up his usage that high, I thought that was an exciting step for him. He had that injury setback and missed, I guess it was close to a month, and then it was just hard to reacclimate him back into the roster in a role that he was used to this season. It just happened where most of our guys all got healthy at once, and Tiago had a tough challenge ahead of him of like trying to find the right fits for that rotation. And Shane's minutes suffered a little because of that, but I don't think it's a long-term concern. It's not a long-term concern. It's more of just like points of emphasis. Like Shay, there wasn't the specific role for you there. Now the challenge is let's come get that role back. Let's keep getting better and come do what you're capable of, which very confident he'll do.
Joe, is there anything this season from player or team level where it's caused you to change your opinion, ceiling, floor-wise, for individuals and the team?
Always, I'm always trying to evaluate that, and it's definitely a moving target and not easy to do. But I think team-wise, I didn't know what to think coming into this season. I liked how we closed last year. Loved the addition with Drew we made. Was excited to know that Rob was coming back. Was encouraged by some of the off-season growth I had seen from our young guys. And this season, while it was kind of complicated with, some of the adversity with the injuries, those kind of things, to see those guys, hit their stride really well in April, I don't think it made me readjust our ceiling more than just reinforce that I like the way this roster's headed and what these guys are capable of. Individually, I wouldn't say there were any surprises or disappointments. It was more I just saw continued growth, and I've said this before a lot to you all that I try to focus on the high end moments that the guys show. Show me your ceiling and we'll raise your floor. And I thought throughout the season from at least a dozen guys, we saw some ceiling capability moments where you look and say, look, if he can stabilize and do this more consistently, we might be onto something. So overall, I felt like we saw a lot of that this year. I think our biggest issue is just consistency. That Spurs series was a good microcosm of it, where we had some great stretches of play and some subpar stretches of play, and we've just got to stabilize and solidify. And I think some of that's youth and some of that's just overall growth that we need to experience.
Joe, I know you pushed back on the salary stuff with the coach, but there have been a ton of things over the last few weeks, be it not traveling the two ways, the hotel situation in Phoenix. People have verbalized that they feel it's really unfair to Tiago for this kind of discourse around the position when he was still in the job. There have been former players who have said that this is going to hurt the Blazers in free agency. What is your view of kind of the reputation that is being created kind of in real time around this organization?
I think, seeing those reports and some of those things, for me it was somewhat disturbing because I've gotten the opportunity to know Tom Dundon really, really well these last 10 months, and it's just not an accurate depiction of what his goals are. Yes, we're going to run things more efficiently in terms of, being economically responsible, in terms of having a disciplined, less is more mentality. But there's certain situations that nobody would know, because I haven't said it and that he wouldn't say it. But I've seen a lot of instances where he was willing to throw big money on the table in order to support this team, in order to put it on the floor, in order to make us a winner. There were multiple trades at the trade deadline, but one that, it's important for me to talk about is we had a scenario that I presented to him about it would have launched us into the tax close to the first apron, would have saved the other team a bunch of money. We would have gotten a nice young asset, and he would have had to write a check for $20 million because he would have inherited that tax bill, and he didn't flinch. He's like, yep, do it. And at that moment, I said, okay, he's about winning. He's going to put money into this team whenever it's necessary. I mean, we've had a ton of conversations already about how we can buy into this draft using cash. Unprompted, he called me one day and said, I just bought us a new hyperbaric chamber. It's coming next week. So there's a lot of, spending fallacies about him. He's going to spend when it touches the players, and the players are always going to be supported.
The two-way situation feels like something that directly impacts players and also the way players would feel about being part of this organization. Can you explain what happened there?
That one's on me. It was more of a miscommunication on my end. We've talked about doing some traveling party reductions. Like next year we'll run a little lighter. I just assumed that meant including them, and I didn't double check. And we fixed that mistake. We brought those guys to San Antonio. That was on me for not communicating properly.
Hey, how does Rob fit into the equation? I mean, he's unrestricted. He had a pretty incredible year. How does he fit into your plans?
Sure. Very open-minded to keeping Rob and very hopeful that we can keep Rob. Incredibly proud of the job he did this year. We all know he's been through a lot with these injuries, and the work he put in this offseason, and then to come back and be himself pretty much, if not more, in some situations, like the way he played. And he had his bounce, his feel always shines. He's so impactful on both sides of the floor for us as a rim protector and roll man. For Rob to be Rob, like, that was such a win for us, and something we all take a lot of pride in. Like, that was a ton of work from health and performance and Rob and his team, and we just all were really coordinated in his rehab, and it's a big source of pride for us, the season that Rob had. So I hope it can work out long term. I know he likes it here, and I know we like him. So
on the coaching search, just in general, Tiago or otherwise, what are you guys looking for in a candidate? What attributes, traits are you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Someone that gives us a big advantage. In their skill set, in their leadership, in their approach, in their mentality. We're just looking essentially, that's a summation of the most talented person possible, but also the right personality that can guide this group and this organization.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.